Hey everyone, today I'm going to be going over my computer engineering degree. I went to the University of Pittsburgh and studied computer engineering for my undergraduate degree, and I went to school from 2018 to 2022. So with that being said, let's get right into it. Freshman year. So I knew I wanted to be some kind of engineer, I just wasn't sure which discipline of engineering I wanted to go into. But lucky for me, the curriculum for engineers in the first year is pretty much the same for all disciplines because it's basically your generic chemistry, physics, and math. So here are the courses that I took freshman year. Econ and Psych were mostly like easy A, Gen Ed electives. I don't think I really learned anything too important. Seminar and composition. This was essentially a writing class for a writing requirement that our degree required. We started with short essays about our history as writers, I guess to give our teachers some background of what kind of what skill level of writers everyone was at, which makes sense since college is everyone coming together from different backgrounds and whatnot. We moved on to longer papers where we learned how to construct writing arguments and how to support them with evidence and whatnot. This was a good class for me as an unbalanced STEM kid who was much better at math and all that stuff compared to reading and writing. So I think it was definitely good reps in writing. Physics 1 was just a requirement for the engineering track that all engineers have to take. It's just your generic Physics 1 class where you learn about kinematics, motion, energy, thermodynamics, all that good stuff. It wasn't really related to my current major as a computer engineer, so it wasn't too useful, but I had to take it. And so that pretty much wraps up my first semester of college. I pretty much just stayed in my room and played video games, did homework, and I played Ultimate Frisbee 2. So it was basically just those three things. Semester 2 is the second semester of my freshman year. These are the classes I took right here. Chem 2 was your generic Chemistry 2 class. It wasn't really applicable to my major as a computer engineer. We had a lab in this class where we did experiments, so that was kind of cool, I guess. Next up is public speaking. This is a class where essentially we learned and practiced public speaking skills. This is pretty good for me because I was definitely more introverted when I first got into college, and so this kind of helped me practice speaking in front of crowds and two people. And in this class I wrote a 10-minute presentation speech on how to do laundry, and I got an A on that speech. So that's kind of funny. Imagine someone just standing in front of you for 10 minutes just talking about how they do laundry, and they get an A for it as well. So dealing them with my words of wisdom. Next up is Intro to Engineering. We learned some pretty basic Unix, Excel, and MATLAB. I think this is kind of a intro to coding sort of deal. Wasn't really applicable to my major, except for maybe MATLAB. And we also learned coding fundamentals later and more major specific courses. Next up is Philosophy and Public Issues. This was basically a generic philosophy class where we just talked about and discussed issues in class and in recitations as well. This is kind of boring to me because I was really only interested in STEM, Frisbee, and socializing. And Physics 2, yet another physics class, except it's Physics 2 this time. We learned pretty much about electricity and magnetism. This was kind of useful and related to my major as a computer engineer because we do electricity and stuff, but it was still physics. And so that wraps up my classes for the second semester of college. So second semester, I went out of my room and spent less time in there. I joined the Asian Students Alliance, which is the Asian Students Club at the University of Pittsburgh. And I met a lot of people and made a lot of friends, and I think I grew socially there, so that was good. So after freshman year, we have to decide on our discipline of engineering, and I think initially going into college, I was thinking that I wanted to do biomedical engineering because coming from an Asian family, it's good to be a doctor or an engineer. And in my mind, biomedical engineering was kind of a mix of both and the best of both worlds, I guess. But I ended up speaking to a professor, the professor of my Intro to Engineering 2 course actually, and he was a big bioengineering department guy. And so he told me that it was a lot of research, and I had a pretty bad research experience the summer before college. And so I didn't rock with that, and so I ended up switching to computer engineering. And I didn't rock with that, so I ended up switching to computer engineering because software engineers make a lot of money. So to wrap up my first year, I didn't really grow much academically. I don't think I learned much school-wise, but I think I grew a lot socially, thanks to me finally stepping out of my room. I started stepping out of my comfort zone, especially in social situations and talking to people. I started learning about lifting thanks to Frisbee, and that also kind of led to me learning about nutrition and how to keep my body healthy and fit as well. And usually first year engineers also have to take calc in addition to physics and chemistry, but I didn't because I took AP Calc BC and did well enough on the AP exam, so I didn't need to take the class. And speaking of AP classes, I came in with like a good amount of AP credits actually. I think here's like a list of all the AP credits I came in with, and I think there should also be like the number of credits that each class covers. So I think I took AP Chinese, which was like a one semester online course in high school, and I got 10 credits out of that, which is pretty crazy, so that's pretty nice. Okay, sophomore year, I started taking courses specifically about computer engineering, which was more exciting because I was getting more into like my actual major and learning stuff about that. It's also worth noting that our computer engineering department was like completely revamping its curriculum, and I think my class was the first year to actually go through this new curriculum, so we were kind of like the guinea pigs of the new curriculum. So semester 1 of sophomore year, here are the courses that I took. A lot of the class codes are ECE, which stands for Electrical and Computer Engineering, because our curriculums for electrical and computer engineering are pretty similar. So the first class that I took was ECE 101, which was Linear Circuits and Systems. This was basically like an intro circuits class where we learned about like electricity and like how to find currents and voltages and resistances and stuff. We had a lab where we did like hands-on circuit building, which was cool and gave us experience for classes further down the line in our curriculum. The second class is ECE 201. This was Digital Circuits and Systems. In this class, we learned about the building blocks of modern computers with topics like logic circuits, Boolean algebra, flip-flops and registers, and like finite state machines. This also came with a lab where we built like digital circuits and with a like virtual hardware description language, which wasn't too applicable to me because I was more interested in software at the time. And the next class is ECE 301, problem solving with C++. This is essentially our intro and like fundamentals of coding class that we have to take as computer engineers, where we learn how to code and we learn the basics of coding. I really enjoyed this class because I enjoyed learning and practicing coding skills, and like, let's be honest, coding is pretty fun when you're just learning about like basic for loops and shit. Next class is ECE 401, which is analytical methods. This is basically our computer engineering like math course, where we learned about topics like matrices, vectors, double integrals, differential equations, and Laplace transforms. And this was an amalgamation course because it was essentially 3 math courses combined and like mishmashed into one course in one semester. So we learned topics about like linear algebra, differential equations, and Calc 3, but only the parts that were like most related to computer engineering, and then kind of just like smushed it all into like one big ball of a class. And then next class is Intro to Engineering 2. Usually engineers take that their second semester of freshman year, but since I transferred into the engineering school, actually I had to take it my first semester of sophomore year. And in here we kind of learned more about Excel, MATLAB, and C++, but this was kind of redundant because we were learning about C++ in our actual computer engineering coding course, and so I didn't really learn much in this course. It wasn't too useful for me. So speaking of transferring into engineering school, my next course is Transfer Seminar. This wasn't actually a real course. It was just like a once a week course where we met for an hour, where essentially people gave us like resources about the engineering school. And so thoughts on my second semester, I think it was cool that I was finally learning like course content specific to my major, so like coding and like circuits and whatnot. It was a lot of new information, and I definitely had to adapt to learning so much new information, especially considering I don't think I like learned much at all in my first year of college. And so this essentially was probably the first like real semester of college for me academically, because I was learning so much new stuff. And so I kept playing Frisbee and going to the gym, and I was still making new friends for both Asian Students Alliance, and I started meeting people in my department. So for my second semester of sophomore year, these are the classes that I took. ECE 102, Microelectronic Circuits. This was like a second level circuits class where we learned about op-amps, diodes, MOSFETs, transistors, all that good stuff. This also had like a hands-on type lab, although this was more like step-by-step instructions and like do this and observe the results as opposed to like figuring stuff out for ourselves, so it was a lot easier. ECE 202, Embedded Processors and Interfaces. This was like a hardware class where we learned about microprocessors, assembly, and embedded system design. We also learned about like data representation, like binary, hexadecimal, octadecimal, and whatnot. We had a really nice professor who was like leaving for like Colorado the next semester, so the class was really easy. It also had like a hands-on lab where we programmed like pins on a microcontroller to make the microcontroller like count and stuff like that. Next up we have ECE 302, Data Structures and Algorithms. This is your generic data structures and algorithms class in C++. We learned about data structures like stacks, queues, trees, and like various algorithms like recursion, sorting, and like searching. We used a virtual machine for all of our assignments, and so we got some familiarity with that. And this is probably my favorite class of this semester, once again, because of like coding. Next up, we have ECE 402, which is the continuation of the amalgamation math class from last semester, except this one is signals, systems, and probability. It was essentially just a signals class with some probability tacked on at the end, and I don't think this was very well taught because I think a lot of people were like really confused about what was going on in the class, and as a result, I think this is the second hardest class that I've taken at Pitt. Next up, we have the departmental seminar, which kind of replaced the transfer seminar for me. It's essentially a weekly seminar where like career-related topics are discussed, like co-ops and like internships and whatnot like that. Next up was applied regression. This was like a stat class. I took it as an elective. We learned about like simple linear regression and like one-way analysis of variance. This is a pretty easy class as well and like pretty straightforward. So thoughts on this semester? It was definitely the hardest semester by far because of all the ECE core classes and also because of the signals class that I was taking. This is also the semester that COVID happened, where we went on spring break and then it kind of got extended for like a year and a half. So everything got moved online after spring break, including finals. And with all the logistics of moving online and like boomer professors who don't know how to use like Zoom and technology and whatnot, there's kind of like decreased engagement during classes as well compared to like in-person classes. This semester I also joined a frat, but it wasn't like a frat where like all you do is party. This was actually like a professional fraternity. And so I was able to meet other engineers of other disciplines and other people who were like studying similar majors to me. And then during the spring, I also went to an internship fair and I landed a co-op. And a co-op is basically like an internship where you rotate schoolwork and internship each semester for a total of 3 semesters worked at the internship. So an example schedule would be working in the fall, classes in the spring, and working again in the summer, and kind of repeating that until you finish your 3 semesters of working. I borrowed a suit from our school's career closet with the intention of going to the job fair just to like practice my interviewing skills, and I ended up landing an interview as well as an internship offer from a company which I accepted. So my 3rd semester of my sophomore year was actually the summer. I decided to take classes this summer because I was starting my internship in the fall. And so this summer, these are the classes that I took right here. EC 1140, Systems and Project Engineering. This was easily and definitely the worst and hardest class I've ever taken in my life. We had to design essentially a whole train system from scratch, and our professor was like purposely vague about like what exactly our train system had to do, and like was very like harsh in grading and whatnot in order to like reflect real world conditions where apparently the customer also doesn't know what they want, and so we kind of have to supply that. So in this class, I essentially improved my coding skills from coding the train system, but other than that, I didn't really like learn much at all, I don't think. Next up, we have EC 1155. This is information security. We essentially learned about general computer security, including like cryptographic tools, user authentication, malicious attacks and defenses. And then we learned about software security, including buffer overflow, operating system security, and cloud and Internet of Things security. The information was pretty easy to learn, but I wasn't exactly sure how to like apply it to what I was doing in my other classes, given we were just like coding data structures and algorithms in my last coding class. But it was an easier class, and we had a pretty good professor. Last up, we have English Comp 400. This class was written professional communication. We essentially learned how to write professionally with things like resumes, cover letters, business emails, and whatnot. I think I pretty much knew how to do all this stuff, but it felt a writing requirement, so I took this class. So to wrap up my second year, I learned a lot of new and unfamiliar content, and so I think I grew a lot academically, and I learned a lot from all of my computer engineering curriculum core classes. I landed and accepted a co-op offer, which I started the fall of my junior year, which I'll get to. I continued meeting people in the Asian Students Club, and because of my frat and also because of our major specializations, I was able to meet more people like who are also computer engineers and make friends there as well. And finally, I moved back home because of COVID and quarantining and whatnot. All right, junior year. For my first semester, as I previously mentioned, I was at my co-op. Usually these are like in person, you go into the office to work with like the company, but because of COVID, I was doing it virtually. For my first semester at my co-op, I worked on things like UI design, except it wasn't even really design. They kind of just gave me like a page and like a software, and they said replicate this page using the software. And so I was literally dragging like rectangles across like a page for a semester, but I got paid decently well, so it is what it is. And I became familiar with agile project development. But other than that, I don't think I learned much at this co-op at all, unfortunately. So for my second semester of junior year in the spring, I was back to taking classes, and these are the classes that I took this semester. The first class I took was Computer Organization and Architecture, and this was essentially a core class about how computers are designed and how they work, with topics on computer instruction formats, microprocessor architecture, and assembly, and using it with like a RISC computer. The professor had a really poor lecture style for Zoom, so I don't think I like learned much, unfortunately. And homework assignments and exams sometimes were completely unrelated to course content, or maybe I just didn't make the connections, but I think a lot of the class had similar thoughts about like just general confusion in the class, and the class being very unorganized. Next up, we have computer networks. We learned about basically how the internet works and wireless network systems. So we learned about like data link protocols, addressing, routing, and like medium access control. This was a decently interesting and easy class, but once again, I wasn't really sure how to like apply it to stuff that I was doing with like coding and I guess hardware and whatnot. And then the next class I took was software construction and evolution. This is a class about kind of constructing a software from scratch and then maintaining and also like evolving it. We essentially coded this game called Hot Civ, and we coded it from like the very basic rules of the game, and then we continued to like add features into the game and into the characters of the game as the semester went on to like evolve the game. And so this was a pretty cool class where we got to build like a piece of software from scratch and end up playing like the actual game at the end of the semester. Next up, we have embedded systems design. This was a class about how computers and their components work. So topics we learned about included like I/O, memory and caches, power management, and system scheduling. We had a lab where we did things with like a Raspberry Pi that sometimes were related to course content. Like sometimes we would, one of the labs we did was like a like task scheduling on the Raspberry Pi thing and like timing each task. And then at other times we do something completely unrelated. Like one of the labs we use a Raspberry Pi attachment called the Sense Hat, which is basically like an array of LEDs. And we would essentially just program like different LEDs to be like different colors and whatnot. It was kind of fun, but it didn't really like connect with the class very well. So yeah, that was that. So next up we have junior design fundamentals, and this is kind of like the precursor class to our like senior capstone project. So this was essentially a hands-on class that focused on developing skills using like modern computer engineering and electrical engineering technologies such as like soldering, PCB design, and microprocessor coding. So we did like mock design challenges. I think we used this like computer chip called a 555 timer, and I made a super simple like clap light switch where essentially if I like clapped, I would have like a microphone that would hear the input and it would like turn a light on. And then after that project, we made like a Bop It variant. And if you don't know what a Bop It is, it's like that like kid's toy from like 10 years ago where like it was like this like stick or something, and you'd have like a button here and you could like bop it, twist it, and like push it or whatever. And there was some sort of like game programmed into it. And so we made a variant with like a wheel where our like game functions were like turning it left, turning it right, and then like honking the horn. And so that was pretty cool to kind of build that from scratch as well. So that wraps up my second semester of my junior year. This was kind of a stacked semester because of all the core computer engineering classes that I took that were supposed to build like a base of knowledge about computer engineering topics. And classes were still remote for most of the semester, although people started coming in and back to campus around the end of the semester. So semester 3 of junior year was the summer where I was back co-oping with the same company that I had worked for before. And I was back to kind of like copying UI on this program and building that. And then I moved on to some code debugging, both of which were like pretty boring to me. And it was pretty high commitment for projects that I wasn't really interested in. So I quit my co-op halfway through and started spending more time on Frisbee, getting into self-improvement, thinking about what I wanted to do after graduation, and hanging out with friends basically. Quitting an internship or a co-op seems to be like a pretty rare thing to do, but I definitely am glad that I made this decision and don't regret it at all, because I definitely wasn't having like a good time or a good experience with my co-op. And that's not to say that co-ops are bad, because I know people who had like great experiences with their co-ops and they learned a lot, so maybe it just like wasn't for me or something. So I was out of there. So to wrap up my third year as a computer engineer, the course content kind of branched out from the core sophomore year classes, and this was good for things I was interested in, which was software, and not so good for things I wasn't interested in, which was more like lower level hardware stuff. And then I buzzed my hair over the summer. I think this was a great decision. Here's a picture of what it looked like. I think it looks great. A guy like me. Wow, look at that sharp hairline. Anyways, I felt like I lost a lot of potential social growth because of quarantining and COVID and not being on campus in a traditional in-person college environment. Because it's a lot harder to make friends over Zoom where like most people don't even turn their cameras on for classes versus like being physically in class. But overall, it was a decent year, all things considered. And so one more year left. So finally, we're at senior year, my final year of college and my computer engineering degree. For my first semester in the fall, these are the classes that I took. So advanced digital design, we essentially designed computer components using our knowledge of microprocessors and digital circuits. And we used VHDL to design and implement things like a multiplier or a CPU, and then we verified our designs with using like an FPGA. This is a decently fun class despite it being lower level and hardware based, because VHDL kind of like felt like coding to me, even though it's like a hardware description language. And this is like a very time consuming class for sure. Next up we have Intro to Image Processing. This is basically an intro computer vision class, which if you're not familiar is essentially a branch of software that kind of deals with like using a camera and like reading what's in like the camera video. So it's what like self-driving cars like Tesla and like other car brands use. So we learned about topics like image space representation, edge detection, feature extraction, and object recognition. And we had weekly coding assignments where we like built on these concepts that we learned, and we had the option of using MATLAB or Python. And I personally chose to use Python because I thought that it would be more useful to me in the future than MATLAB. Next up we have algorithmic thinking. This was a class where we essentially learned about algorithms and put that learning into use by solving LeetCode problems. And essentially we'd get assigned the LeetCode problems weekly, and we would discuss how to like solve them in class after we finished them and how like everyone did their own solution. So this was a fun class, very you get what you put into it type of class. I personally didn't invest too much time into this class, and although I still got a good grade in this class, I didn't get as good at like coding problem solving as I probably could have. But I think that was fine for me at the time because that wasn't like my primary focus. Next up we have Art of Making. So this was a very hands-on design class, and we learned a lot of modern design processes like prototyping, which is kind of a pre-prototype to test and validate ideas simply and at like a very low cost and time investment before actually like investing resources in building a prototype. And we also learned about user-centered design, as well as a lot of hands-on skills such as drilling, threading, wood sawing, video shooting, and sewing. And I don't think I would have encountered like any of these skills in my like normal computer engineering curriculum, so it was really cool to like learn about these as well. So this was a cool class taught by an absolute genius Chad of a professor. So he wasn't actually like a genius Chad, but he was really nice and intelligent for sure, and had like a very expansive and broad way of thinking, which I really admired and respected. And we ended the semester doing like an 8-week project capstone where we were able to present our project at the Design Expo. And I think this class is probably the best class that I've taken at Pitt, and I think if you currently attend Pitt, you should sign up for this class because I think all majors can take it, and I think it's really useful no matter like what you're trying to do in the future. Next up we have discrete math. This is your generic discrete math course where we learn about like combinatorics and like number and set theory and whatnot. But yeah, this is just another boring math class that I just had to get through. So to wrap up this semester, this was another pretty stacked semester, mostly because of advanced digital design and computer vision. Those took a lot of time every week for their assignments. It was also the first semester back in person. It was definitely nice seeing everyone and being back in person despite being mid-pandemic with the Delta variant. But Pitt ensured everyone was either vaccinated or tested, or else they wouldn't be able to like get into academic buildings. And finally, to wrap things up, we have my spring semester of my sophomore year, and these are the classes that I took this semester. So it's worth noting that for this final semester of school, I only needed 2 specific classes to graduate, and that was EC 1188, which is Cyber Physical Systems, as well as Senior Design Project. And so as long as I passed these 2 classes, it didn't really matter what I took or what grade I got in my other classes. So I ended up taking like 5 1-credit fitness classes, which was pretty fun, but also kind of crazy because I was like lifting on like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. I had like Pilates on Monday and Wednesday. I had like swimming on Tuesdays and Thursdays. There's just a whole like fiasco of classes, but it was pretty fun. But I'll get to those later. First up, we have Cyber Physical Systems. We essentially used bare metal C to code this like little red robot from Texas Instruments. It was like a line following robot. And we learned about like Internet of Things and essentially how data travels from a sensor to a microcontroller. This is a fun hands-on class. I think it's probably the second best class I've taken. And we had an enthusiastic and caring professor who cared about like students succeeding and actually learning, as opposed to just like focusing on like grades and memorization and whatnot. And so it was pretty fun to kind of get this like little robot to just like do things such as flash an ID or like follow a line or like stop once it gets like within 10 feet of a wall or something like that. Next up, we have Robotics Studio. This was a trial 1-credit course where the professor essentially gave us like a little robot kit for us to like play with. And we met weekly to work on the robotics kit. It wasn't a real class. Everyone passed by attending like the very first class. So it was very much a get what you put into it type of class. I personally didn't put too much time into it, and so I really didn't get much out of it. And that kind of made me learn something about myself, that unless there's like a grade attached to something, I won't really care about completing something unless I'm like really interested and have a lot of free time in doing that thing. Next up, we have Senior Design Project. This is our senior capstone project to end our degree. And we essentially spent the whole semester designing a project based off of prompts that the professors gave us. So our group, we designed like a Li-Fi system, which is essentially like Wi-Fi, but instead of using radio waves to communicate, we use like light signals to communicate data. So the professor gave us a list of like 20 projects, and we were supposed to pick our top 3 that we wanted to work on. And this project that I got assigned to wasn't actually in my top 3. And so I didn't have any like intrinsic interest in this project, but it was also like my senior design capstone, and so we got it done anyways because it's senior design, and at this point I'm ready to graduate and finish school. I felt like for all the projects in this class and the class in general, the requirements for the projects were very rigid and it didn't give students much room to like be creative and design their own like truly unique solutions. And so I got the vibe that a lot of people were just kind of ready to be done with their project and like pass the course, as opposed to like truly making something that they were like really proud of, which is definitely a shame and kind of disappointing, especially for a like senior capstone course. But it is what it is, and everyone passed the class and graduated and whatnot, so you know, good for us. So that's the end of my computer engineering degree, and the rest of the classes that I took this semester were fitness courses that I took just to stay like a full-time student for like scholarship and financial aid benefits. So I'll briefly go over those. So the first fitness class that I took was intermediate swimming. You basically just become a fish every Tuesday and Thursday morning, and you swim laps with a coach. It was good cardio and conditioning, to be honest, and I'm pretty glad I took this class. Next up, we have advanced weight training. We essentially met twice a week in the gym to lift. It was basically a free hour dedicated to just lifting, which was nice for sure. Next up, we have HIIT and conditioning. We met twice a week once again and did bodyweight HIIT workouts. This was kind of boring and definitely my least favorite fitness class because it was a lot of bodyweight stuff that I could already do, and so it wasn't really like a real workout for me. And there was no real like progressive overload or progress on like weightlifting, where you can like see your progress in both your body and your like lifting numbers going up. But this class is just kind of rinse and repeat every single Tuesday and Thursday. Next up, we have personal fitness. This is basically the same thing as my weight training class. It was a free hour dedicated to lifting. And finally, we have Pilates, where we met in the evening and did Pilates twice a week. This was a hard class for me, and I didn't really like it that much. Like, I wasn't really interested in Pilates, but I felt that it was good for me in that it like really pushed me mentally, and also it hit my abs consistently. And there was like a lot more stretching and flexibility stuff that I didn't do in my normal weightlifting routines. So I probably liked it more so because it was good for me than an actual interest in Pilates. So this was a pretty fun semester. and I was definitely super consistent in the gym because of courses. And so yeah, that's it. That's my 4 years in college, all the classes I took, and my computer engineering degree. I have my diploma right here, still not opened yet, but this is proof that it's all done. So to wrap this video up, I'm just going to go over some things that I learned throughout the course of my 4-year college career. And so the first thing would be tenacity, and like essentially grinding through tough assignments for long hours without giving up. That was definitely a big thing that I think I got better at and is definitely useful for really whatever you want to do in life. The second main thing was essentially learning new things and like learning how to learn. I was able to supplement a lot of knowledge and concepts in class that I didn't understand by just like looking them up on Google or like watching some YouTube video of some dude explaining it. To be honest, I think I could have learned everything in this degree on like YouTube or Google or like some free course website, but I probably wouldn't have like known what topics to actually look up to like make a holistic computer engineering degree. But I guess actually thinking about that now, I probably could have Googled that as well, but oh well, it is what it is. College is definitely a good environment for you to grow socially and personally with a really high concentration of like people that are in a similar place in life as you are, which is like finished high school, going to college. And you'll probably not find this like concentration of people that are similar to you like literally anywhere else, and so there's really no replacing that. And so next I'll give some tips for current students who might be thinking about or are currently in an engineering discipline. So number one, you can do it. Have confidence in yourself. I had no good study habits or systems, and I don't think I'm like by any means a genius or whatever, and I still did pretty well in my degree and graduated with a pretty solid GPA. If I can do that, then you can definitely do that. You can do it. Believe in yourself. Next up is definitely develop productive systems and habits and stick with them. So this is something that I personally didn't do, but I think if I did do this and had like consistent good like study habits, like my degree would have been like a ton easier and would have had like a lot less like stress and time committed and whatnot. So for example, like you can make it a habit to review your class notes for 10 minutes every night. And this will help you understand your course content and like reinforce that in your brain. And it'll also help you like realize what you don't really understand from class, and then you can go on and take steps to like learn about those. Next is go to office hours. And you probably hear this in pretty much every other college video tips and advice that you watch. And that's because it's good advice, because your professors are there to help you learn, and like that's what they get paid for. So don't be scared about going into office hours because it's really a really good resource. Next up is start your assignments early. Especially for engineering, you'll have a lot of assignments that are kind of like bigger assignments, and so you'll have more time to do it. And so you might think, oh, I have like a month to complete this project. But if it'll take you like 2 weeks of work to actually do the project, it'll be a lot easier on your mental if you finish in like the first 2 weeks and then have the final 2 weeks to kind of do whatever you want or like work on whatever you need to work, as opposed to like sure having the same amount of free time for your first 2 weeks and then finishing it in the final 2 weeks. But those first 2 weeks you would kind of have like that assignment always in the back of your mind, and so turning things in early would kind of just give you peace of mind about that, and it's definitely like freeing doing that. So I would definitely recommend starting your assignments early. Finally, have fun with it. College is a pretty unique experience that you really experience once or maybe twice in your life. So don't stress over that exam you got a 60 on, which might result in you getting like a C in some class, because it won't matter in 5 years. And I know this is easier to say than to actually do, but just trust me on this. And especially in computer engineering, to my knowledge, technical knowledge and any like cool projects that you might have kind of outweigh your GPA in like job interviews and stuff. So for example, if you have like a 2.5 GPA, but you built this like really cool social media platform idea that you had, that will impress employers a lot more and kind of like save your GPA. But yeah, definitely enjoy your college experience. Don't stress over things too much because it's really not worth it. So what's next for me? What am I going to do now that I've finished college? And the answer to that is entrepreneurship. So my goal is to be financially free with a successful like business, YouTube channel, or other like social media business, and kind of be able to generate income from that, and then eventually invest my income either back into my businesses or into like assets that will make me money, such as like real estate. And I'm aware that I'm very privileged in that I can like move back home and live here at a pretty low expense and kind of focus on working on my business, as not everybody has that opportunity. So I'm definitely gonna like take advantage of that and try my best to follow this dream of mine. And then worst comes to worst, or if something bad happens, I can always turn to my degree and land a software engineering job for a stable salary. But I don't think it'll come to that because, you know, guy like me. So yeah, that's my computer engineering degree and all the courses that I took. So if you have any questions about anything I said in this video, feel free to leave a comment down below and I'll try my best to get back to you. But otherwise, I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.